So I'm going to be speaking today about the revival of Gaelic dialect in the central Argyll, and quite a lot to get through. It's work that I've been involved in for more than 10 years now, and so I hope I'm able to dance across it adequately for it to make sense. So just a little bit then about myself to kick off with. My story is the classic immigration story of Irish people on my father's side to Glasgow, Highlanders into Edinburgh. I've even got a wee great grandmother from London as well. So immigrants to the cities. From there, my Edinburgh folk went across to Glasgow. But rather than me then being born and bred in Glasgow and completing the immigrant experience of then assimilating with the body politic of the place, I ended up being brought up in Argyllshire, in Cowell. So my Edinburgh folk went to Glasgow, that's where my parents met, and then promptly off they went to Argyll. So I am Indigenous to the north and west of these islands. I'm an ethnic Gael. Half Irish, half Scottish, but I also have the incomer experience of having come to Argyll and not having any familial connection there. So for anyone, well, everyone's an incomer at some stage in the past, you know, at some point, everyone has immigrants in their own ancestry. But the main point to make is just that I'm coming from that perspective of being an Indigenous person and an incomer as well, so I understand both perspectives very, very well. So in terms of language and landscape, if you just imagine the brown line, as primitive as it is, imagine the brown line as the land, and Indigenous people and language are embedded in the landscape. They are grown from the landscape in the same way as the flora and the fauna, you know, the animals and plants and insects and birds. And Indigenous language, and in our case, the Gaelic languages of the western seaboard of northwest Europe, are of and from the landscape in a way that languages that come in are not. So in this case, if we think of English as the incomer, English is capable of talking about the landscape. And it's obviously, with English being so incredibly versatile, it does very well at times, but it can never talk from the landscape or talk, you know, it can never voice the landscape adequately in the same way that the Gaelic can. So this is the historical situation where Indigenous people and language are embedded in the landscape and can give voice to that landscape. You know, as time goes on and colonial forces play out, Indigenous people are disembedded, if I can possibly, I don't know whether I'm coining a new term or whether that's a real word, but they're dislocated, displaced, and quite often, certainly in the Highlands anyway, what ends up happening then is that people that come to live in the Highlands and the people who belong to the place linguistically are in a sort of superficial position where they no longer speak directly from the landscape. And that renders the landscape in some ways sort of dumb, you know, unable to communicate, unable to interface with the people who live there. And whether you belong to a place or you've come in more recently, we all end up almost as sort of just permanent tourists, because we don't know what the place names mean. You know, we can't speak the language of the ancestors of that place. So we've got a very, very short sort of history linguistically, and therefore a much reduced ability to communicate the most resonant elements of being in a particular locale. So the idea with reviving local language then is to have a situation like this. And of course, not everyone's interested in language. You know, some people with the best intentions, you know, are not particularly interested in local heritage, even if they come to a place. While that's a shame, it's perfectly natural and normal. But revitalising local language, local dialect allows both incomer people who have arrived in a particular area later on down the timeline, and people who have belonged to the area several generations back. For the language to be revitalised means that both peoples can come together, with a real social lubricant, and something that allows them both to embed themselves, these groups, back in to the landscape. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that incomers and Indigenous people don't mix. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that in any place there can quite often be a little bit of natural conflict between these elements. I've certainly witnessed that from my time living and working in the Highlands. So this is an ideal thing, an ideal result of language revitalisation. So the local dialect revival in Bute, Cowal and Mither Gael, as an incomer to Argyll, but as an Indigenous Gael, I was in this very odd position of feeling like I was connected to the people of Argyll because we're of roughly the same sort of stock, but at the same time, and anyone who has recently moved to a new area will understand only too well what I'm saying here, you don't have the big network of cousins. Your sister's not married to the guy that runs the taxi company, or this kind of a thing. You don't have these really, really deep connections that people who belong to a place have. And I realised that with the language dying off in Bute, Cowal and Mither Gael, and there being very, very few people left who spoke it, that a fantastic way to really give literal voice to my love of the area in which I had been brought up. And I was back and forward between Glasgow and Cowal because my parents parted company. My mum back to Glasgow, went to school there, but I came back home, what I felt like was home, to Argyll at every chance I got and every holiday. And as I came into the world and then through my teens, the last of the area's fluent speakers were passing away until actually a very good friend and mentor, Robin McDicker, the last native speaker who was fluent in the language, who still remained in the area, passed away only just a month ago. So that was a real milestone and a real emotional time for us here. So in order to really feel like I was able to embed properly and marry language back up with ethnicity, then revoicing the landscape of the land that had, the landscape that had given me my upbringing, that had taught me my natural sensibilities. My father being a great naturalist as well. Revitalising the dialect really was the most direct possible way to do that. So how did I do it? Because you're thinking, wow, how does one go about that? So absolutely devoured every single manual for the standard tongue I could possibly get a hold of until I had the grammatical structure, and functionality in the standard tongue, and then began to replace all of that word for word with every new thing I learned about the Gaelic of Bute, Cowal and Mither Gael. So you start off with the internet and you go into archives and you try and track down the slightest reference and you note everything down. You've got archival scanned books and websites and online dictionaries, and just noting every word, phrase, story, song, anecdote, anything to do with the dialect. And it's good to point out, in fact, in case you're wondering, that it had never been academically covered. It had never been, no assessment had been made of the dialect of this area, which basically mirrors the original territory of the Clan Campbell and some of the smaller clans in that area, which is why the language was so similar from Craignish across to North Bute, Cowal, and down to Knapdale as well. So that's the internet. You just dredge it for anything you can possibly find. Then there's obviously archives like the online portal, Tober and Dulwich, or the Kist of Riches. So here we've got a couple of recordings from Knapdale, for instance, which is within the dialect area. So you listen to them, you internalise all the features, you note down all the words. The School of Scottish Studies has a huge collection of recordings from the area and from many other areas, in fact, so that's been incredibly useful to extract those and listen to those. And Niels Holmer, who I'll talk about further on as well, to do with Arran, also made a big collection from the area of words and phrases and proverbs and songs, which wasn't published, but his son Arthur Homer very kindly gave me access to that. Of course, the elders who still remain in the area are the most important part of all of this, and have to be, should be consulted and respected. Some of them are fluent speakers, some of them are just conversational, maybe they've only got words or phrases, some only remember bits and pieces of the language, some only remember the language spoken around them with their grandparents when they're young, but they've got fantastic anecdotal evidence of the language, and some of them, if you're lucky enough, when you're revitalising the dialect of a given area, will actually still be speakers, and it means you can repair the intergenerational gap that has been created by the language dying off. And then you're just internalising everything that you learn. Lying with the headphones on every single night in life, I leave the headphones on for about 3 years every single night, internalising all these features from the recordings that I'd made and acquired through different sources. Mimicking the accent, and as you learn the accent, you start to learn the ways of thought of old people. And given that these old people were grown straight out the ground of the, right out the landscape itself, then they're a direct portal, back to a position of being able to interface directly with the land, and then just using everything that you learn. My children, this is them a long time ago now, and as you can see, me a long time ago as well, during my 70s rock phase. So I've never spoken English to the children. Spoken the dialect with them ever since they were born. So they're born and raised speakers, and we used to lie every night together, sing the songs, tell the stories, go over the proverbs to see if they could work out the meaning of them. Just raise them as if we were, in the, 200 years ago in our Gael linguistically, and make them then the new custodians in that carrying stream of culture and language. And really just, dedication, absolute utter pig-headedness and refusal to give up even the darkest, most hopeless hour, where you just think, what on earth am I doing? All the old people are dying, and this is hiding to nothing. Something just keeps you going. A cultural imperative, it could be called, and the spirit of Mother Earth, and the fact that you're doing a service to the area that gifted you your upbringing and your sense of peace and home. Compartmentalization is a huge thing, just saying, okay, so there's a place for global languages and culture, but they should not live at the heart of one's existence as an Indigenous person, nor for that matter as a person resident in an area with a fragile Indigenous culture. Respect has to be primarily given to the culture that existed, that was grown from the land. Otherwise, there's always just going to be a dislocation. You can never repair it properly. You can never truly interface with the land. It takes generations for the new language that's come in to catch up with the idiomatic ability of the homegrown language to express every nook and cranny and stone of the landscape. And it's wonderful to hear Richard talk so lavishly about that. And also to mention that the language was a buzz for me, because that just set the scene for so much of what I'm talking about just now. I'm running on quite a bit here. The practical elements of how the Gaelic dialect was revived, well, you've just heard that. This is now the spiritual element of it. And I've never spoken about this publicly because it's actually mostly very private and sacred to me, but I'm going to share it because I think it's really, really important. I'm sorry about the poor quality of these photographs. I hope you can still see that. Gosh, I've really got bald the last just even few months. Wow. So identify places with traditionally strong spiritual potential and resonance that can be reanimated for practical use. And of course, spirituality and ritual are all connected into practicality. They're all connected into how to live the fullest and healthiest life within the environment that you inhabit. And I just spent long, uninterrupted hours meditating in peace in these places. This is a spring at Kilmorey Ob, which is wonderful clear water. It's got a beautiful flow through it. And the site is both pagan and Christian. It was clearly originally pagan, which suits me. And then for other people who are practicing Christians, there's a cross on the stone. So it's something for everybody. No matter what your faith or outlook is, you'd find great peace at this place and many other places within Argyll, and of course the rest of Scotland that can likewise provide that kind of environment. But if you spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just listening to the larks and the bees and the wind, and drinking from the fresh water of springs, you know, and giving thanks for that, then there's a certain rhythm from the land that starts to enter you, and it starts to fuel the quest, and it starts to teach you things. And you know, some people might go, it's a lot of woo-woo crazy stuff. And, well, I can only speak from experience. I mean, I was probably you would call me an atheist 10 years ago, and while I'm not a theist now, I'm a much more spiritual person, and it's the land. It's the land for me. That's where I've arrived back at my spiritual connection. And then as the purpose of these ancient sites becomes clear again through gradual revelation, you know, I began slowly and respectfully to make use of them for the purposes of marking important events like coming of age. And here's my wee daughter in the middle here, who's not so wee now. She's about 5'9", looking very quizzically at the camera. And this is us at Àdhamh Ó Broin Township, where I've spent a lot of time. I'm on the board of trustees there, and we do a lot of work at Àdhamh Ó Broin. And it's a hearth for the language revival, where we can, well, before all of this nonsense last year, we could meet round the peat fire and have a dram and share songs and stories, and expose my children to natural old-time hospitality and entertainment that don't involve screens. So here's my daughter having come through her coming of age ceremony at Dunad. The ceremony and the way to go about it was all revealed to me during meditation. What can I say? That's that. We managed to host almost 40 Maori from Aotearoa in New Zealand about 4 years ago at Dunad. We took them through a welcoming ceremony and blessing on top of the mountain, in which my daughter here was involved, because she came through her coming of age ceremony. And the functions of the different things on top of Dunad, the footprint that's there that we call Falna Ben He, the Fairy Women's Mark, and the Rock Cut Basin all became very, very clear what they were for. Not just the idea that the kings or chiefs of Dalriada were once inaugurated there, but for deeper connections to nature and to landscape. It became very clear to me what the use of the site was, and so we welcomed the Maori there, and it was an incredibly spiritual experience, because they voiced their traditional prayers all the way up to the peak of Dunad on this, you know, it would be a painter's heaven, you know, the way the mist was hanging over the mountains, with these 40 Maori standing doing their haka on top of Dunad after we come through the welcome ritual. What a fantastic experience. We also welcomed my friend Karanio here and our family from the Six Nations Reserve in Canada there, the Ganyan Mohawk, and had a fantastic day of ritual welcome and cultural sharing, followed by an evening of
Àdhamh, forgive me for joining in there. What a wonderful photograph. It's extraordinary. It was just to say we have about 1 minute left. I was wondering if you would potentially share some of the Arran dialect with us, or the Ayrshire dialect, or Gael dialect, if you wanted to wrap up your talk.
Yeah, I'm just about to get on to the Arran section. I think it's key to just note how the process can be replicated in Arran. So
if that could be done within sort of a minute or two, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah. So in terms of mental health, then here's some of the old people that I was able to bring into this process and allow their knowledge to be respected for what it was, and for them to feel like they had agency again, and they were able to gift something to the project. So that's a huge boon, intergenerational transmission being re-established, and them feeling that they have agency in the process. And this is Robin Vicker, who just passed away a month ago. He was our last elder. So that was the real end of an era. So in terms of Arran, here is Niels Holmer's Gaelic of Arran. That is the tome for Dalriada for Midder Gael. We never had a book, but there is an academic study of Arran and several academic articles. And so just a quick note there of how the Arran dialect could be revived following the Gaelic model from Dalriada. Somebody trained up in standard Gaelic who then switches over to Arran using all the kind of things that I was talking about previously. There are no native speakers left, but there are people with words, phrases, memories, social history, etc. You'd identify strong spiritual sites, as we did in Midder Gael, begin an immersion programme with local enthusiasts, ideally a mix of Indigenous people and incomers, to provide some of that social oil, which relates directly back to the landscape. And as I say, just feel the reparation of bond between land and people take place as island residents are once again embedded into their environment. And I see it as inculcating hyper-local ecological sensibility during language and lower learning, improving mental health through mental exercise of language learning as well, and exposure and engagement with nature. So there's my 3 kids, all strong, confident, carriers of the local culture, and I hope that would be able to be replicated. There are my contact details. While anyone's noting down the contact details, if they would like them, a few phrases of Arran Gaelic, if you'd like to have a blast at saying them. If you were asking how someone was, you would say, "Could you marahau?" Let me give that a blast. "Could you marahau?" Literally, "What like are you?" which is how we end up with in Aberdeenshire Scots, who fit like. To answer that, you would say "Hagame." Hagame. And that's, I'm fine, I'm well. To say thank you, you would say "Garametakit." Garametakit. And just learning simple phrases, if you're an Arran resident, would allow you to speak a language that hasn't been spoken by anybody who actually had the language fluently in 20 odd years. So for me, it's a real mark of respect to the island to be able to speak any of the local Gaelic words from that island and have landscape. Maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but I feel the landscape's listening and it can hear that kind of a thing.